I will start by asking the UN resident coordinator, because we're talking about biodiversity. And according to the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, more than 1 million of our flora and fauna on the planet are in danger of extinction. Just a few days ago, which is May 22, we celebrated the International Day for Biological Diversity, which actually stems from the fact that 22 May 1992, there was the adoption of a convention on biodiversity. So, in line with this and all the work that the UN is doing, and on the global diversity framework, I would like to ask you, what is your standpoint about the action list, the UN action list and the SDGs, and how do you see the progress over the years, especially when we refer to biodiversity loss, and where are we with Vision 2030?
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. It's great to be back at the Yerevan Dialogue. So let me start. I can't resist. I have to start with a little sentence that Armenia's biodiversity is at crossroads. And I want to say for the two reasons, actually. Geographically, Armenia is, at the crossroad of different regions. So we have this really wide diversity of ecosystems and climate zone. So for those of you who are not based here, we do have amazing biodiversity. And it's at the crossroad also because we have COP17 coming up in a year and a half, and I believe my colleague on the left will talk about this. But this is a huge opportunity to really accelerate action to preserve biodiversity. So I think besides the crossroads for peace, we need to look at crossroads for biodiversity as well. Now let me go to the main question, or to the first question. Currently, the UN, we work under these two main large framework when it comes to biodiversity. And as you probably know, initially we had the Convention on Biodiversity that was developed in 1992. Again, I say this because this is one of the very first global event and very first convention that Armenia signed as an independent country. So it shows that from the beginning, Armenia was very committed to environmental matters and to biodiversity. Currently, we are working under this Kunming-Montreal global biodiversity framework, which has set up a number of targets, I think about 23. And these targets really intend to help us address the drivers of biodiversity loss. This was done in COP15, so that was in 2022. In COP16 last year, which took place in Cali, there was some major decision taken about financing biodiversity. And I say this because it actually took 30 years to put in place a commitment from 190 plus countries to actually have dedicated financing to address biodiversity loss. So these are, for the moment, these two major framework under which each country now has to develop their own legislative framework, strategies, etc. And this is what Armenia is doing. When it comes to the cause or the reason for losses, there are typically 5 main drivers. And I will mention them because, again, I like to talk global, but at the same time to make reference to what is relevant to Armenia. And all 5 drivers are relevant to Armenia. The first driver is about land use. So this is about extension of urban development, it's about agricultural use, it's about deforestation. The second main driver is about pollution. It's mostly water, soil pollution, it's air pollution, it can be generated by urban development, but it can also be generated, in the case of Armenia, by the extractive industries. It can be generated by waste management. So there are different sources for this second cause. The third driver is climate change, very obviously, and in many countries, this is about water availability. It's about having more forest fires. So there is again here different symptoms and different causes to how climate change will affect the biodiversity loss. The fourth reason is invasive species. And again, because Armenia has been on a crossroad, and there's been for a long time, there's been a lot of people coming in and out of Armenia, the trade, transport also bring invasive species. So there is actually quite a lot of invasive species in Armenia, including in water bodies. And then finally, the fifth reason is overexploitation. So overexploitation can be overfishing, it can be too much tree cutting, which happened here in the 90s when there was a shortage of fuel, so there was a lot of deforestation. And this is something that the country now is really trying to address. But as you know, to reforest the country, to move from 10% to whatever, 20 or 30%, it takes 20 years, right? So it's a long-term endeavor. Overexploitation can also be related to the mining or to the water use, etc. So these are the sort of 5 pillars that can that we need to address when we look at biodiversity. And there are 2 important points I want to make today before I close my first part. Is we tend to see biodiversity as the butterfly and the leopard. I say leopard because, as you know, here we have this beautiful Caucasian leopard. I haven't seen any, but there are a few, and they are. It's an amazing animal. But we tend to see biodiversity as an environmental topic. It's not just an environmental topic, and I'm sure there are experts in the room, and of course you will nod the head and say, yes, of course we know that. But my experience, particularly in the past few months when we've been discussing COP with many different stakeholders, with the public, with the private sector, is there is not yet a very good understanding that the drivers that I just described, the drivers of biodiversity loss, are actually the responsibility of multiple economic sectors and of us as citizens. And so this is going to be a big endeavor for us globally and locally in Armenia, is to really drive the different sectors. And I will mention only a few, but agriculture and food system is a key sector because it's responsible on average for 50% of biodiversity loss. And it is very much affected by the biodiversity loss. So agriculture is a key sector that needs to be very much involved in the dealing of, in addressing biodiversity loss. The construction industry is also, because of the way the resources that it uses, but also the footprint that it has. The mining industries I mentioned, so, and the health sector as well. We all remember COVID. Well, COVID is really a perfect example of the nexus between biodiversity and humans and health when things are not managed properly. So what I'm saying here is, in the next year and a half, we really have to commit to have this cross-sectoral interaction. And for us at the UN, it means that we have to share a lot of knowledge. We have to share knowledge. We have to develop and localize knowledge. So everything that these 2 big conventions or platforms have come, we need to localize and see how they are reflected in Armenia. And we need to access to develop a lot of data. And why I say this is, one sector I didn't talk about is the high-tech sector, but you know that Armenia is a proud tech sector country, and the tech sector consumes a lot of energy. We all know that, and I have this aspiration that we should get the tech sector to sort of pay back and support a lot more the environmental topics and a lot more biodiversity. And one way they can do that is by really developing a data architecture on biodiversity that could be used by government institutions, by us, by the NGOs, and also by the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Françoise. So, as mentioned by the UN resident coordinator, it seems Armenia is a globally significant biodiversity hotspot. And I've also read, and as the UN resident coordinator mentioned, that there has been a lot of overexploitation of the forest. And I would like to ask you, so is there any specific threats that Armenia is facing at the moment, and what is the government doing to tackle them? And of course, before we come to COP17, as Françoise mentioned, in 2022, 196 countries adopted the Kunming-Montreal Global Diversity Framework. And amongst them, what was decided was the 23 targets for 2030 and the 4 goals for 2050. So amongst those 23 targets, which you brushed a bit around, I want to ask you, as advisor to the Prime Minister of Armenia, so what is the government doing to work on this framework? And in a second part, I will come to the upcoming COP17, so you can give us some more details. So I'll allow you to give us a little brief about Armenia, the specific threats, and what is the government doing right now about the biodiversity threats. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for moderating the forum. And just like my colleague mentioned, as you may know, Armenia is one of the biodiversity hotspots, and it's due to its geographical location, which is also supported by the various ecosystems such as the wetlands, the semi-deserts, the mountains, and also the forests. And this allows us to have a wide range of plant and animal species, including the endemic species, which are very unique to the Caucasus region, and they are mostly located within the corridor in Armenia that stretches from the north to the south. Of course, this is great, and this allows us to put Armenia on the global map in terms of the biodiversity, but at the same time, just like in any other country in the world, the consequences of the climate change, desertification, the biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation are becoming more and more obvious and prevalent challenges for us as well. And our generalized approach that our policies are laid on is one to conserve, is to restore, and also to be able to sustainably use the nature's ecosystem and natural resources, taking into consideration all the challenges that we have with the deforestation, degradation, drought, and other environmental issues. And the implementation of those steps are the ones that should be and are based on integrated science-driven, community-focused strategies, and they are, of course, supported by they are strongly supported by our international partners. And just to name a few examples of the issues that we had, even though we're still continuing, working on those challenges, is, of course, just it was mentioned again, is the jewel of the crown, is the Caucasian leopard conservation project, and also another conservation project that we do for example, for the red deer, or as we call the Caucasian noble deer. And just recently, on the 22nd of May, with our colleagues from WWF, from the Iranian government, and also Madame Jacob, we had the opportunity to add 9 more deers to the forest of the lower region. So those are just examples of the species and animals that were at the verge of extinction, but throughout those years we're able to add the numbers significantly. And of course, this needs to be done hand in hand, working on the eco corridors, and not only in the regional or country level, but also on the international level, connecting and making bridges from one region to another. And I think this will also be an interesting topic to be discussed during the COP17.
Thank you. So when we speak about biodiversity, I cannot but think about Africa. From the mountain gorillas of Uganda's Burundi Impenetrable National Park, to the eagerly anticipated grasshoppers, to the wide-based migrations of Kenya's Masai Mara, Africa is a treasure trove of life. So I now turn to Moses, and I would like to ask you, given your extensive experience in politics and governance and being in Kenya for the last few years, how do you assess the progress, or if not the progress, the work which is in progress about the SDGs and the UN Convention and Framework on Biodiversity and Climate Change, especially for Africa? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I also join the other panelists in thanking the government of Armenia and ORF for convening us. Africa, as you've mentioned, is home to great biodiversity. And Africa is alive to the triple planetary crisis, which encompasses climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. Africa, for the record, does not subscribe to the gospel of climate denialism, because we believe that science tells us the truth, that our climate is changing, and as a result, we are losing our biodiversity. Most African nations have been signatories to the main conventions on climate change and biodiversity. I think more than 90% of African nations are signatories to the UNFCCC, the Convention on Climate Change. And African nations, most of them have become signatories to the Convention on Biological Diversity. It means that most of our countries have come up with nationally determined contributions, national climate action plans, and of late, a number of countries have been coming up with biodiversity strategy and action plans. Africa is a continent with 55 nations. So sometimes it's very difficult to talk about an African position on issues. But generally, the African position is espoused by the African Union. And the African Union has come up with a biodiversity strategy, and the African Union has also come up with a climate change and resilience plan. And that binds the member nations to be able to cascade and come up with individual country initiatives. Let me come to biodiversity. And I want to congratulate Armenia for getting the rights to host COP17 next year. Nairobi, Kenya, where I come from, is a seat of the United Nations Environment Programme. And when delegates came from Montreal, there was a subsidiary body conversation in Nairobi, which gave further definition and framed issues for COP17. And so Nairobi, Kenya, and Africa has been a significant contributor to this conversation and enrichment of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. The lack of ambition, and I think, let me say this applies to biodiversity and applies to climate change, is that one of the things that we must avoid when we come to COP17 in Yerevan, God willing, next year, is to move away from the talking shop arrangement of past conferences of parties. I've had the privilege of attending a few conferences of parties, particularly on climate change, and the African view is that some of these COPs are becoming extensive talking shops with very little action and with very little ambitions. Sometimes the conferences of parties have become fora for compliance and filling forms and templates, rather than fora where people can take away serious action. And I want to encourage that when we come to Yerevan next year, from the perspective of African countries and from the experiences we have had with the UNFCCC, when there was the last COP on biodiversity, I think that was in Cali, yeah? There was a conversation around digital sequence information. There were conversations around funds that needed to be established to ensure that there was global support for biodiversity measures. I know under the Global Environment Facility, a global biodiversity fund has been mooted, and a digital sequenced information fund has also been mooted. It was called the Kali Fund. I hope that we'll come up with a Yerevan dialogue or a Yerevan consensus that will provide proper regulations for these funds that will provide clarity on access mechanisms. We can learn a lot of lessons from the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, the Loss and Damage Fund, which have been part of conversations in the climate change COPs. We have established these funds, but we have put up very restrictive access mechanisms. I know you have asked me about practical experience. Just last year, through the parliamentary network, we were able to access some funding from the Green Climate Fund. It was not very substantial. It was just about $1 million for capacity building of members of parliament in Kenya. Recent events have shown us that if you exclude politicians from the conversations, then the people, through populism, can elect somebody who then subscribes to his own version of facts and his own version of science. But the process of accessing funds from the GCF, I can tell you, is like what they say in the Bible, a camel going through the eye of a needle. And so out of Yerevan, I hope that we'll come up with proper structures and regulations to allow the nations that need to access these funds, particularly the small island states. There's also concern about the role of indigenous communities. Indigenous communities have largely been the curators, they've been the guardians, they've been the conservators of biodiversity in many places, be it in Europe, in the Americas, in Africa. Whenever we go for the climate change conferences, there is always a section that is set aside for indigenous communities. And I am sorry to say that they are expected to be dramatic, they are expected to picket and to hold up placards, but I rarely see them in the negotiating rooms. I hope that in Yerevan, we will welcome, will acknowledge, and will embrace indigenous communities because they possess a lot of knowledge. That knowledge is what we are saying needs to be monetized. We have an example in my country, Kenya, of a giant pharma company that went to the soda lakes of the Rift Valley and were able to extract certain enzymes that were then replicated and used in manufacture of bleach. If you put on faded jeans, there is an agent that came from Kenya that is used to give effect to the faded jeans effect. There was nothing that trickled back to the indigenous communities that have been curators and guardians and conservators of that knowledge over the years. And that is why we hope that Yerevan is going to give effect to a proper funding mechanism so that it can also trickle back to the indigenous communities. I know I can't say much, but there's also the issue of, I think, the drivers to biodiversity loss, invasive alien species. I have very, immediate example. Lake Victoria is Africa's largest freshwater lake. And when the colonial masters, the British, came to Kenya, they introduced a fish species called the Nile perch. The Nile perch is a giant of a fish. It can grow up to 200 kilos, can grow as long as 7 feet. Now, the Nile perch became the bully of the lake, eating anything and everything in its path and in its sight. The only bigger animal in the lake beside the Nile perch is a crocodile and the hippo. And the hippo doesn't eat fish, and the crocodile also has a low appetite for fish. And so as a result of the introduction of the Nile perch, a lot of biodiversity in the lake has been lost. Now, how do the local community get compensated? How do we ensure that there is justice for the local community who have faced biodiversity loss as a result of an alien species that was deliberately introduced and it can be traced? So I think just to summarize, out of the climate change conversations, which is tied to the biodiversity conversation, we would like to see, particularly as Africa, greater action, less talk, greater commitment, particularly by those nations or states that have unduly benefited from activities that have made our climate or have made our globe less livable. But it would be unconscionable from an African perspective. It would be unjust. It would be improper that our parents and grandparents bequeath unto us certain biodiversity that will not be able to pass it on to the next generation. That will be a great failure of this generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses. And speaking about our failure, or what are we leaving to the next generation, it brings me or reminds me of a concept of Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. And here I would like to turn to Anna, and who is actually the founder and the founder of Ubuntu World for Romania and a social entrepreneur. So I would like to ask you, Anna, how do you reconcile the concept of interconnectedness between global diversity, climate change, and humanity? Thank you.
I'm really truly honored to be here for the first time in Yerevan, and to see so many people that are present here for this climate change and biodiversity. I want to thank to Armenian government and to ORF team to give me this opportunity to come here and be a voice of the nature, because Ubuntu World is I am because we are. It's from southern African countries. So as I said, we are here today because it's something deep is calling us. The earth is changing, not in a good way. I just came 2 days ago. We have 3 weeks in Romania of rain non-stop, so it's changing rapidly. And we all know that it's not just a climate crisis, sincerely. It's not just a biodiversity crisis. It's a crisis of disconnection. We are disconnected from the nature as a people, disconnecting between economy and ecology, and disconnection even inside ourselves. We are nature. We are not outside the nature. And also we are not the masters of the nature. So we, as Ubuntu World, this is what we work to heal the relationship between people and the nature. So we help, what we do at Ubuntu World, we help companies because we have a background in consulting, helping companies to shift from linear to green energy, circular economy, real sustainable practice, not just to meet the targets, and just the shift the way we think and act. So we need a new shaping mindset, more holistic way, more leading by heart, not by mind, but because with nature, you cannot make targets. Everything it's unknown. So we need to be really, really connected to the youth, because they are the forefront that are really connecting with the nature. The indigenous people, thank you so much that you told Moses about Africa. This I'm advocating very, very much. I'm born in the countryside, the mountains, and I know very well, without instinctive, how it's working with the nature, with the changing weather, or with the soil, or with the plants, and everything. Yes, we need science, not just for study, but also to practice this. And we need these people from the bottom to the top to lead this problem issue with the climate change. We cannot treat climate change as a business. Even though I'm helping business to develop, we need a different approach. If we have a linear destination, we will not solve this problem. Everything is in a circular way. Okay, so another thing that will help the climate change and the biodiversity, it's, like I say, policy alone don't change behavior. Education and arts help people understand and care. So compassion and caring, emotion, connect with the nature. That's why we use them to shift perception and create new living story around sustainability. Because what we need now is not the fear. We need more courage, more caring, no division. I know it's really a big division around the world. There is war, there is everything, but more unity. And this unity is not by words, it's not by strategy, it's just to connect really, really each other inside ourselves and with each other, with the people around us and businesses and everything. So let's protect the biodiversity not out of guilt, but with love for the earth, and love for those who come after us, and love for who we are right now. When we reconnect each other with ourselves, we are reconnected with the living planet, and everything can change, and it will not be so complex issues.
Thank you. So I would like to bounce back on the point that Moses mentioned earlier about indigenous communities and also on small island developing states. And I would like to ask Ms. Françoise here, so about all the work that UN is doing and about how you gauge this progress. And myself, coming from Mauritius, which is a small island developing state, and which is very much concerned by the existential threats of climate change and biodiversity loss, I have to say that over the last few years, the different COPs, the different conferences, the different summits have been very impressive in terms of what they had to say and offer and the promises, but we are still very far from having access to that kind of mechanisms, cooperation, especially financing from the developed countries to be able to meet those commitments and to ensure our survival. I would like to ask your stance on this before we go back to the upcoming COP17 and the expectations. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Financing is a big question. I'll say a few words on that, but it's not the only question. So, if I'm not mistaken, at the COP16, the negotiation on financing became very long and over several months. And at the end, there was a decision to allocate $200 billion per year. So this is pretty significant. But as our colleague Moses said, the process is only starting. This being said, I think every country has mechanisms to tap into. And between the markets, the financial markets, and the private sector, there is a lot of finances available. Often, what is not available is good projects and is enough capacities. So I was just informed actually this morning that there is one of the major banks here that is going to launch some green bonds for about $30 million in the next few weeks for Armenia. So this is good news. And this is one of the ways that we can really accelerate the action on biodiversity and on climate. And what I want to say also is there is actually a lot of good things that are being done around the world, and including in Armenia. There is a lot of pilots, there is a lot of good initiatives, but what we need now is to accelerate. So financing is one of the accelerators. There will be, you probably know, in July there will be a financing for development event in Spain. This is 10 years after Addis Ababa. I also hope it will be not just a talk shop, but really considering what's happening with global ODA, I think this is going to be a major conference on which we are going to look really at the architecture of internal finances and definitely on how we can augment the financing for both climate change and for biodiversity. And if I'm not mistaken, Armenia will be represented there. So financing is one thing. For us, the UN, as I said, we are looking in these sort of alternative financing modalities because we know that it's not just the UN that can make things happen. And we look, for example, at the private sector. We know the private sector can have a huge impact. First, by adopting better production mechanisms, and second, by contributing to environmental mitigation, to rehabilitation when it comes to mining, and to simply observing the laws, right? So this is important. The second point, which is quite a big focus for us, is governance. And you've heard me at the beginning, I said Armenia has ratified most of the global conventions. And to a large extent, Armenia has translated this convention in its legislative framework. And to a large extent, it also has the strategic plans in place. Now, Armenia is preparing these two major sort of strategy, the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, NBSAP, and we should get it, I hope, in the next couple of months. And then a revised commitment for the NDC for the climate change. Now, once these are in place, this really needs to be budget. There needs to be some financing allocation, some budget allocation. There need to be really a strong effort to implement this commitment. This is where we are standing here. We have to implement because the mechanisms are in place. Even the environmental monitoring mechanisms are pretty much in place. The mining sector, I keep going back to that sector, but there is actually a mining strategy up until 2035, if I'm not mistaken, that take into consideration the environmental impact. So things are in place. And in many countries, the laws are there, but it's a matter of having the political will, the political vision, the political will, the funding, and the capacities. So for us, the UN, a big focus is going to be to also help the country build or strengthen or expand its capacities within the government, but not only in the government, also with the local communities, and to work with the civil societies. I want to mention a couple of other areas. We have this denomination called the nature-based solution. It sounds very lofty, but it's actually extremely powerful approach to addressing both climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. And when you look at big city center like Yerevan, we really look at how do we do urban development so that we bring back the nature into the city. And this links a little bit to what Anna Maria was saying about reconnecting with nature. It's very hard for kids to connect with nature when there is no nature in their immediate environment. So nature-based solution is a big focus for us. It's not necessarily super expensive, but it's really about bringing back the ecosystems into the cities. Education will be a big sector. I think we can do a lot with kids. So we are already discussing with the Ministry of Education what we can do in the lead to COP, but also for the long term, how we can integrate in curriculums a lot more substance on biodiversity and on environment in general. I said earlier, public awareness is going to be a big thing. Even in Armenia, people don't know they have this amazing biodiversity. So we have a lot of awareness to do basic awareness, but we also have to work, as I said, with all the different stakeholders so that they embrace this endeavor of restoring biodiversity as their own responsibility. Really, we need to have a whole society approach, whole of government approach. And for that, we need to share knowledge, produce knowledge, share knowledge, and then responsibilize people or put incentive or disincentive so that they act. And I think I will stop here to leave some space for everyone else.
Thank you. Thank you so much for very insightful information. And especially it's good to know that Armenia is doing so much. So I would like to turn to you, Humbert Zoom, and ask you, given that already there is so much happening, all this collaboration with the UN and the work. So now that there is this upcoming COP17, there's a lot of expectations from not just Armenian or UN, but the whole world. So I would like to ask you, in what direction is the work progressing? And what are the challenges you're facing right now? And also, what can be the potential deliverables? And I also want to emphasize that, especially for SIDS. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first and foremost, we are very honored by the decision of the parties to host the upcoming convention here in Yerevan, Armenia. And also I'd like to thank and congratulate the Colombian presidency and also the CBD Secretariat for their hard work and also for the successful COP. We will keep working and building on this success, making sure we have a smooth transition and also synergy between the COPs. Our vision is to have the inclusive COP by assuring active participation from all stakeholders, including the CITES, the indigenous people, youth, women, civil society, the local communities, so that the decisions and the consensus that will come up with is welcomed and cherished by all stakeholders. This is also a very great opportunity for us to further our multilateral efforts for the global biodiversity protection and also showcasing the natural richness and heritage of Armenia. Regarding the agenda, the COP17 will be, I think, crucial in the regards of agenda, as we'll be kick-starting the global review, as it was mentioned, to assess how far or how close we are by the global goals by 2030 or 2050 set by the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And of course, in order to do this, we need to gather all the MBCEPs from the countries, and Armenia is currently working on its final draft, and we urge others also to follow so that we and the Secretariat have enough time to review this. And if need be, this will allow us to do some course correction in our national strategies and action plans by helping each other and also sharing our experiences. And to address your statements, I think we are on the same page as the development of the funding formulas, assessment methodology, and the contribution of the private sector will hopefully be another important outcome of the COP17. As you have mentioned, there are so many decisions that we have made, but we still do not know the methodology and how we're going to fund the money to support the decisions from the previous COPs. This will definitely not be an easy task for us, but we'll do our best to make sure that we are not only a welcoming host from the organization point of view, but we are also we carry on the active presidency and neutral mediator for the all parties during the COP17. And of course, there will be other topics. The agenda will be very huge. I think we are going to have also a forum specifically designed to discuss the issues that the cities face. And but to summarize, I would like to say that we want COP17 to be yet another celebration of our collective wisdom of living in peace with nature. And I'm sure we'll all succeed together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So speaking about it, as you said, like the youth, the women, all the communities will not be excluded. So it will be an inclusive dialogue and platform for all. So now I would like to turn to Anna, and I would like to ask you, because your work involves advocacy and a lot of youth empowerment, what is the role you think the youth have in this whole climate change and biodiversity debate? And what are the challenges that you, your organization, and the youth are facing with respect to that? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. Youth are the forefront action for the future generation in climate change and biodiversity. For example, in Romania, I am 42 years old, as I said early. I start, I think, at 7, 8 years old in the school. We call culture civic culture. So 1 hour per week we go and do reforestation, we do gardening. So we were in touch with nature for an early age. So I think will be great, and I'm sure also in France and in other countries exists this curriculum, scholar curriculum, where children from kindergarten are active in working with the nature. Also to advocate for climate and biodiversity by creating storyteller for the kindergarten, but also for the school, you know, in the first degrees. And also, I know, at least in Europe, or I'm traveling, I know this is usually become a normal process, family teaching children to be conscious consumer. So I see this almost the time. I think in France I see more than in other countries. And because everyone now, every children now, every kid or youth, it's on social media, especially TikTokers or Instagram, to speak more about their, let's say, experience in nature, to take more pictures, to do some movies and so on. And also to encourage them to take care of their inner world and outer world, like practicing all the time mindfulness. I know in India, children are doing yoga. So practicing, you know, nature is inside of us, not also outside. Everything that is inside is also outside. I know it sounds philosophical and not related really about this topic, but it's the reality as a show. And yeah, every relationship starts from within with the earth. Challenging is that we have to, as a parent, but also as teachers, to more emphasize on children this, more than give them all the time the tablet, to watching everything that AI is producing for them, to go out in nature, also to put them in contact with intergenerational, like older people that have experienced life on this planet and Earth. And yeah, I think so, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Given that we have now less than 5 minutes left, I'll turn to Moses, a question to you, before rounding and summarizing. So after this this panel discussion, what is now your hope and expectation of the upcoming COP, and especially as you laid the vision for Africa and the indigenous communities and the SIDS, what is the last word that you would like to put forward for the upcoming COP17? Thank you.
Thank you. It's noteworthy that the US, the largest economy, is not a signatory to the UNFCCC, and it's also not a signatory to the Biodiversity Convention. I just want to urge countries in the Global South that when we come to Yerevan next year, we come confident that we can be able to come up with solutions. You talked about small island states, and they have immense biodiversity because they've been separated from the pervasive effects of humanity. But the plight of small island states, they cannot solve them themselves because there's a lot of interdependence. If there's global temperature rise, a small island state cannot mitigate or cannot take action against that on its own. So yes, we can talk about self-dependence, we can talk about budgets, but it requires global action. And that is why in the climate change space, we made a lot of push for the Loss and Damage Fund. Now, the Loss and Damage Fund is probably 2 years old, and still there's no great clarity on its access and its utilization. And we hope that when the climate change community goes to Brazil later in the year, there'll be clarity on that. Now, that is also another problem, that we have quite a number of frameworks with overlapping mandates and objectives. So you've got a framework on climate change, a framework on biodiversity, you've got a COP on desertification, and then you've got UN conferences on sustainable development. Now, I don't know how you can discuss sustainable development without discussing biodiversity or without discussing climate change. So we must find a way of building synergies between these many multilateral environmental agreements. And I like the conversation that is ongoing at the United Nations about, bringing agencies closer together. And I hope that a number of those agencies will come to Nairobi to sit alongside the United Nations Environment Programme. In Kenya, we have an interesting success story called the Northern Rangelands Trust, where we are combining climate change adaptation, we are combining biodiversity preservation and packaging that, and we've been able to go to the carbon credit market. Now, Northern Rangelands Trust has set aside thousands of hectares of pasture, and so there's the carbon sequestration part of it, there's biodiversity preservation part of it, but the local community, the local Maasai community are able to get certain benefits come to them because we are selling carbon credits to the global market. Now, there is also some injustice, because if carbon credit, or if carbon is a product, then a product needs to have a standard price. You know what the price of an iPhone is, whether you are in this country or you are in another country, the price is standard. But you'll find that African carbon sometimes goes to the market for as low as $20 per ton, whereas European carbon goes to the market at about $80 per ton. And I know this is one of the outstanding issues in the UNFCCC, the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, making sure that there's justice, there's consistency, there's uniformity in the carbon markets. Let me conclude by talking about the gender dimension. Our experience is that when you let women take charge of biodiversity and environmental conservation issues, they tend to do a better job than men. So we need to bring women into the conversation, young people into the conversation, indigenous communities into the conversation. Last week, I launched a report on indigenous communities. There's a community called El Chamus. It's a Maasai community. They know which plants to use to cure a snake bite. But modern medicine, antivenom must be stored in an environment between 2 degrees and 8 degrees centigrade. So you go to hospital, you can't find antivenom. But within the indigenous communities, they know which herbs to swallow and mix. And so the conversation around biodiversity protection must also go with the curation of the knowledge that goes with it. And that's why we are talking about DSI and making sure that the DSI fund that is established, there's clear guidelines and clear procedures to ensure that that woman with the indigenous and traditional knowledge of mixing antivenom gets a benefit. Because once the big farmers get that knowledge or that secret, they're going to package it and it's going to be big. And I think the only reason why the US is not part of these conventions is because of intellectual property. They know that most of their big pharma corporations have gotten rich at the expense of indigenous communities.
Thank you, Moses. I like especially the fact that you touched on these points, and also being a politician and a man, you're still championing the cause for women. So hats off to that. And it's true that the youth are the leaders of tomorrow. And nowadays with the whole empowerment of the youth and women, we do look forward that more youths and more women come forefront and are empowered to be the leaders to take action and things forward. But it's also very important what you said. We're here talking about the actions to make this world a better place. So it's important to be united. It's important that there are concerted efforts and actions, especially if we want to ensure our survival. And very important is that what is happening is that different parts, different conventions, different summits happening. While there is the intention, it is very important that we do not lose sight that while just focusing on different things being done, that we are not also losing grip, as you said, like we cannot talk about climate change without biodiversity, excluding climate change, etc. So I hope and trust that be it the UN, be it the different summits, be it the COP, that they take into account all this so that together we can have not just concerted efforts, but also sustainable actions that ensure that we have a better future for Mother Earth. So thank you very much. It was lovely having you all panelists here. And I hope that the audience as well is happy and here at the Yerevan dialogue, and that we can make the most in Yerevan, which is a beautiful city. And thank you. Thank you very much for your time.